May it please the court, attorneys for the defense, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Last week you went through a process that is known as voir dire, which literally means to speak the truth. And that's what you were asked to do, as you know, as you were back there being questioned by the attorneys for each side. And that process is designed to find 12 people who can be fair and impartial to both sides, not favoring one side or the other, but who can give both sides an even shake and start off with a blank slate. At this stage of the trial, known as the opening statement, the attorneys for each side, myself on behalf of the state, Mr. Ford or Mr. Wadley on behalf of Mr. Baldwin, Mr. Price or Mr. Davidson on behalf of Mr. Eckles, have the opportunity to come before you and tell you a little bit about the case and what issues or questions you're going to be asked to resolve in reaching your verdict in this case. Now, our purpose, as I say, is to help you, to aid and assist you, the jury, in not only having some idea of what the evidence is to be, but also what issues or questions or what elements you'll be asked to decide whether the state's proven or not. Now, in this particular case, charge is capital murder, and for you to return a verdict of guilty on any count, in order to sustain a conviction for the charge of capital murder, I expect at the appropriate time Judge Burnett will tell you that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt two things as to each defendant and as to each victim. First, that Damien Echols or Jason Baldwin, looking at them separately, or an accomplice, somebody acting in concert with them, caused the death on one count Michael Moore, on another count Stevie Branch, on the last count Chris Byers. That's the first element, that that this defendant or an accomplice caused the death of these kids. The second element is that when they did this, when these defendants did this, that they did so with the premeditated and deliberated purpose of doing so. Now, what's the proof expected to show? The proof's expected to show, ladies and gentlemen, that on May the 5th, 1993, Michael Moore was 8 years old. He was a student at Weaver Elementary School in West Memphis, a school right there in the neighborhood where he lived. Stevie Branch was 8 years old in the second grade at Weaver Elementary. Chris Byers was 8 years old, second grade at Weaver Elementary. The proof's going to show that there's an area in their general neighborhood known as Robin Hood Hills. And the proof's going to show that that area is what every kid's dream would be for a place to play. Hills and trails and woods and the kinds of things that kids would love to have to play in and explore. And in this case, ladies and gentlemen, to acquaint you, this area, this entire area, all through here and down in here and specifically in this wooded area here, is what the proof is going to show is known as Robin Hood Hills. All of that area. This is North 14th Street, right here. This is Goodwin Circle, and at the end of where North 14th intersects with Barton, a little further to the south on this photograph, right on the corner, Michael Moore lived, and across on the other corner, Chris Byers lived. Stevie Branch lived a little further south than they did. And at about 6 o'clock on May the 5th, Chris Byers and Stevie Branch were on a bicycle, and Michael Moore was on a bicycle, and they were seen headed north on 14th toward this area. And a lady that lived in this house right here saw the boys in that area. They were last seen headed toward Robin Hood Hills. This was about 6 o'clock. When the boys didn't come home when they were supposed to, the parents, of course, began searching, and It's been a frantic night of searching. The next morning, searching continued. Search and rescue people were involved. The entire detective division of the West Memphis Police Department, everybody looking for Michael and Stevie and Chris. Well, finally, in this area here, this is right here, this is 10 Mile Bayou. And coming into 10 Mile Bayou, coming through these woods is a smaller, we'll call it a creek, it's probably more like a ditch, running through this wooded area and into this ditch. People were searching all out in here and frankly all over West Memphis and that part of Crittenden County, over in these woods, just searching everywhere. A tennis shoe is seen floating in the creek. Officer Mike Allen goes to the scene, sees the shoe. He tries to get in position to get to the shoe. It falls in the water. He walks around this tree and gets back in the water, walks to the tennis shoe, and as he's walking to the tennis shoe, he feels something against his foot. He lifts up his foot, and the body of Michael Moore floats up. At that time, they secure the scene. Other officers are called to the scene. They secure that area, and Detective Brian Ridge gets in this creek or ditch and goes inch by inch. Finds Michael Moore. They remove his body. He's bound, hand and foot. He's naked. I believe his head is to the north, his feet to the south, laying on his side. They go up, find some clothing. They find tennis shoes, Michael's Cub Scout cap. Go a little further to the south in the ditch and find Stevie Branch. He's naked, bound hand and foot, under the water. They remove him. They go a little bit further to the south and they find Chris Byers, bound in the same manner. In this area, the proof's going to show that right in the area where Michael Moore was, there was an area that it didn't look like any of the other surrounding area. There were no leaves on this particular part of the bank. There had a shiny quality to it. It had been appeared to have been, the proof's going to show, had been slicked off. There were lots of scuff marks, unnatural marks to the area, whereas the area right beside it had leaves on it and didn't have that appearance. There's no blood. No blood at all. The clothes of the boys are crammed down in the mud, except for the shoes that floated up. Their bicycles are found right here. There's a pipe right here over 10 Mile Bayou. It's a pretty good-sized drainage canal. A big pipe with I-beams beside it, and the kids would walk across this I-beam and play over in here. And you can see some of the trails when you get the photographs and see them up close. And right here at this, at the pipe and the I-beam, the searchers find the kids' bicycles in the 10 Mile Bayou where they had been dumped. Now, as the proof develops, I want to tell you in advance, there's going to be a lot of testimony from the Arkansas Crime Laboratory, and some of this evidence is going to be what we call, I guess you'd call it negative evidence. It doesn't really show connection to anybody, and there will be a reason for us putting that on, and we'll explain that to you later. But for instance, there will be proof like on the bicycles, there aren't any fingerprints. On some things that were in the kids' pockets, no fingerprints. Things like that, and you may wonder why we're putting on evidence of a negative, but we'll explain that to you later. Now, as the proof develops, the proof is going to show, ladies and gentlemen, through scientific evidence, the statements of these own defendants, Damien Echols and Charles Jason Baldwin, and other evidence that they caused the deaths of Michael Moore, Stevie Branch, and Chris Byers. Now, on the element of premeditation, when you hear the descriptions of the injuries and see the injuries, We expect the proof is going to show but one conclusion, and that is that these deaths were premeditated. The proof is going to show, ladies and gentlemen, that Michael Moore suffered severe head injuries and he was drowned. The proof is going to show that Stevie Branch suffered severe head injuries. The left side of his face was mutilated and he drowned. The proof is going to show that Christopher Byers had severe head injuries, skull fractures, that his genital area was removed, and that he bled to death before being placed in the water. At the conclusion of this case, ladies and gentlemen, after all of the proofs in, after each witness has testified from this witness stand, after Judge Burnett has instructed you on the law, I expect to come back and stand before you and ask for your verdict of guilty on capital murder for the death of Michael Moore, Stevie Branch, and Chris Byers. Thank you.
May it please the court, Madam Court Reporter, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, good morning again. My name is Paul Ford. My partner Robin Wadley and I are here today representing Jason Baldwin. I'd like to spend a few minutes with you and describe to you what I believe the truth will show in this case. First, as Jason's lawyer, we are here today and in the days that come searching for the truth. The prosecutors sitting here are searching for a conviction.
Your Honor, I've got to object to that. Mr. Ford knows that's improper in opening statement.
Sounds like argument or more argument.
The judge is here to ensure a fair trial is had. You're here to determine justice. Opening statement has been described by lawyers in many different ways. It's been described as a roadmap, so you know where you're going, where you expect to turn right and left, what your ultimate destination is. It's also been described somewhat like a puzzle, that at the trial is putting together the pieces of a puzzle. But it helps to have the picture on the box when you're putting together that puzzle, so you'll know where you may want to put the different pieces. And that's a good explanation for it. So I'm going to try just for a minute to just give you that picture on the box for this puzzle. First, let's start with an understanding of the person of Jason Baldwin. The evidence will be that Jason Baldwin is a 16-year-old boy, that he was arrested on the day he got out of school of the 10th grade. The evidence will show that Jason is just an average student. But the important thing is the evidence will show that Jason's not a troublemaker. He's not one of those kids that the school officials are constantly having to deal with. In fact, I believe the evidence will show that the school officials were shocked that Jason was accused of this crime because of their dealings with him, the kind of person they knew him to be. Jason comes from a poor background. Lives in a trailer park known as Lakeshore Trailer Park, which is right off I-55 as you're heading into West Memphis, in between Marion and West Memphis. If you're familiar with that area, as soon as you cross over the bridge past the way station and heading into West Memphis, there's a trailer park there that's centered around a lake. That's where Jason has grown up. Jason has two younger brothers and is raised by his mother. His mother works in Memphis, Tennessee. She works a job from 3 to 11. And so she's at work when it's time for children who have to go to school to be getting ready for bed. So Jason takes the obligation of taking care of his two younger brothers, getting them to bed. And then in the morning, Mom is still asleep because she's been up late, and it's Jason who has the obligations of getting himself up, getting his brothers up, getting everybody dressed and fed, and catch the bus and go to school. That's the kind of person Jason Baldwin is. So, with that kind of person, why are we here today? We're here today because on May the 5th, in 1993, a tragedy occurred in West Memphis, Arkansas. And that tragedy was a brutal killing of 3 8-year-old boys. No one is going to argue, no one is going to say anything but that is a tragedy. That's not the question, though. We're not here to determine if a tragedy occurred. And we're not here to determine whether these boys suffered a horrible death. What we're here today, and the purpose of this trial, is to determine if Jason did it. The prosecution told you that around 6 o'clock to 6:30 in the evening of May the 5th, these 3 young boys were out playing, riding their bicycles. And their parents missed them. They began to wonder where they are. And they immediately became concerned the way I would with my children. And they began to look, and they began to holler, where are they? The way we all would. When it became apparent they weren't just at the neighbors next door, they became more concerned. They began to search even harder, the way everyone would if their children were missing. But unfortunately, they didn't find them that night. And the search was called off, and they'll wait till morning. When morning comes, the police get involved again. The police and the parents and everyone is concerned, and they are looking for these boys, as they should. And at approximately 2 o'clock on the afternoon of May the 6th, they found them. They secured the scene, which was described to you. They taped it off with that yellow tape that you see on crime scenes or where fires occur, so people are to stay out. Don't disturb the area. There may be facts, there may be clues, there may be evidence left out here. Don't disturb it. They do that. As they search that area, you'll see from their own testimony, they found nothing. Not even a drop of blood. At that time, the questions were in their minds. Questions upon questions. They had to find the answers. It's the job of the police department to find the answers. But they didn't have the box that came with this puzzle to look at. They didn't know what type of pieces they were trying to put together. The evidence will show that since they didn't know who they were looking for, they began an exhaustive and massive investigation. They went door to door in this community, knocking, asking, what have you seen? What have you heard? Can you tell us anything to help? You'll see that they were looking for transients. They were going to homeless shelters, not only in West Memphis, but in Memphis, looking for someone who might just be passing through. West Memphis is a trucking community that has tremendous industry based in trucking. They began to look for a trucker who may be passing through. The evidence will show that they went and obtained fuel records from the truck stops in the area to see who might be passing through and have bought truck fuel. You'll see that they were looking for a veteran. They went door to door looking for a veteran, someone with military experience, because some of the things that they had found led them to believe they were looking for a veteran. They began to look for known sex offenders. But they weren't looking for a 16-year-old boy. The West Memphis Police Department was in charge of this investigation. But they needed help. They didn't have any answers to the questions. So they elicited the help of the Crittenden County Sheriff's Department and all of their forces. They elicited assistance from the Arkansas State Police and their Criminal Investigation Division. They elicited assistance from the police in Memphis, Tennessee. They began to receive information and help and clues from police departments all over the country. They began to look for assistance from the FBI. They began to try to go throughout the community with a questionnaire from the FBI to determine what is the profile of this killer. But despite that search that was massive in scale, there were no answers to their questions. There was no solid evidence pointing to anyone. And the pressure began to build. An arrest needed to be made. Chief Inspector Gary Gitchell of the West Memphis Police Department was conducting daily press conferences. The public wanted someone. The press wanted someone. They wanted answers to their questions. But the evidence will show that as late as the 28th day of May, they admitted they were blindfolded. They had no answers. But suddenly, an arrest is made. Jason Baldwin is arrested. The police swarm into his life, into his residence, and arrest him. In the middle of the night, they come in, they take his clothes, they take his shoes, they take his personal belongings, they obtain his school records and his school grades and his school work. They obtain samples of his hair, they obtain samples of his blood, they obtain his saliva, they take his fingerprints, they take his handwriting samples, they take footprints, and they make cast of his shoes for shoe prints, all looking for something to link him to this crime. And then they had to take all of this evidence and send it out to the experts. Send it to Little Rock, to the crime lab. Send it to the FBI in Virginia at Quantico for them to assess it. Send it to experts in Alabama for their opinions. And you'll see once again, they came up empty. No substantiating evidence to link him to the crime. But before that ever occurs, and before that is made public, Inspector Gitchell goes in front of that same press who had once been the source of his pressure and says, on a scale of 1 to 10, the proof against this young boy is an 11. And from that point forward, nobody believes him. No matter what he says, no one listens. The police have an 11. This is an open and shut case. But you'll see that that's far from the truth. You'll see that Jason Baldwin came in front of this court and declared his innocence. And that's why we're here today. The testimony will show you 3 things that I want you to be listening for carefully. I've told you first about this massive investigation that took place. You'll see the evidence they chose to disregard. The suspects, the statements, the physical evidence, they chose to disregard because it didn't fit the puzzle that they wanted to play and make in front of you. You'll see that the evidence that they have and that they'll present to you today in the days that come is disguised. It has been twisted and manipulated and distorted in order to make the pieces of the puzzle they want to build to fit together. And you'll see that from their own witnesses. Lastly, you will see from their own witnesses evidence that will show that Jason Baldwin is innocent. From their own testimony, from the witnesses they will bring in front of you in the days that come, you will see one of three things, all of which, or any one standing alone, will show that Jason Baldwin is innocent.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Scott Davidson, and Val Price and I are representing Damien Echols in this case. Now, I had the opportunity to talk with some of you during the voir dire process, and Val talked with some of you, and we both agree that we believe that you are a jury that will hold the prosecutor to his burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, now that we're through with the voir dire process, this is, as both lawyers have already explained to you, is opening statements where we can give you a bird's eye view of what we expect the evidence to show. Now, after the opening statements here, we will begin our testimony. The prosecutor will be able to put his testimony on first. Now, I ask that each of you remember that the cross-examination, or the testimony that we will be able to elicit after they have put their witnesses on, we will be able to question each witness, and that cross-examination is just as much evidence and is just as much testimony that you can consider. And we ask that you remember that. Not only that, also, the prosecutor will be able to put on his entire case before we have an opportunity to put anybody on. So I ask that you just keep an open mind, and as you promised earlier in voir dire, to wait until all of the testimony is in before making up your mind. Wait until you've seen all of the evidence and been instructed by the court, and go back and deliberate before you make up your mind in this case. Now, this is the opportunity that we have to tell you what we expect the evidence to show. To be truthful with you, this is a little bit of an unusual case, in that we got a list of maybe 150 witnesses, potential witnesses. And I could sit here and go through what we expect each witness may say, but we'd be here for a long period of time. So rather than doing that and going through each one of those witnesses and giving you a preview, what I'm going to do is to give you 4 different themes that I think that you will see from the testimony that is elicited, both during opening or during the direct examination, the case of the prosecutor, and the case that we will put on. 4 different themes that I think that you will see. And the first theme that I think that you will see from the testimony that is elicited is police ineptitude. In other words, I think that what you will see will be sloppy police work. I think as you see the case progress, you will see things that the police decided not to do. You will see evidence they decided not to send into the crime lab. You will see leads that they chose not to follow. You will see people they chose not to talk to. And I think this is a theme. I don't know if the bailiff gave you pads, but I suggest if he didn't, get one. Start marking these down. I think you will see it from the testimony that comes out. It will be very evident to you. Number 1, police ineptitude. The second theme that I think you will see from the evidence that is presented is what I call Damien Echols tunnel vision. I think that you will see from the testimony that when they couldn't find anybody, any trucker, when they couldn't find a transient, they couldn't find a VA vet, they began looking for somebody to pin this crime on. They began looking for someone in the community. Who can we put this thing on? And I think that you will see that they began having Damien Echols tunnel vision, where they start taking all the evidence that comes in and trying to, as Mr. Ford said, fit it into their little puzzle, fit it into their little picture. Now, I anticipate that you'll also see that basically these will fit together, and those are basically the same thing. Now, as we look at this, I think that you'll see that there are, again, people that they didn't talk to, and that's just as important as the ones that they talked to, we submit. And now there is a byproduct to this. You're also going to see that our client, Damien Echols, well, I'll be honest with you, he's not the all-American boy. He's kind of weird. He's not the same as maybe you and I might be. That'll be evident. But I think you will also see that there's simply not evidence that he murdered these three kids. So number one, police ineptitude. Number two, Damien Echols tunnel vision. I think the third thing and the third theme that you will see from the witnesses is that Damien Echols simply was not there. And I'm going to again, wait until all the testimony's on. It may be a long time before you see this, but I think that you will see it. We will put witnesses on, and these witnesses will be able to tell you Damien Echols was not there. We'll have family and friends saying he was not there. This is where he was on the afternoon of May 5th of 1993. This is where he was on the evening of May 5th of 1993. So wait. Take notes of these things also. That's a third theme that I think that you will see. Now, the fourth theme that I think that you will see and this really includes all of them, and it says that the prosecutor has not proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think that those are four themes that you can look for as you look at all the testimony that comes out. At this point, you may be asking yourself, why did they put me on this jury? Why am I here? Why am I sitting here? Well, the reason, ladies and gentlemen, is that each of you are the barrier. You are the barrier. You individually and collectively are the barrier. You're the ones that require the prosecutor to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. You're the ones that upheld the oath. You're the ones that answered the questions back there that you would do so. And there's a number of things that you impliedly said when you swore in as a juror. And the first one is that you would follow the law as the judge gives it to you, whether you like it or not, that you would follow the law. The second one is, you promised to try Damien Echols on the testimony that is elicited from the witness stand and from the exhibits that are produced at trial. Not upon suspicion, not upon guesswork, not upon innuendo, and not upon anything you may have heard or read in the press, but solely upon what comes from the witness stand. And the third thing that you impliedly said that you would do, that you'd listen to the testimony. That when someone gets up on that stand, that you would look at them in the eye.
Your Honor, excuse me, Mr. Davidson, I hate to interrupt you. Your Honor, it's not that the state disagrees necessarily with what Mr. Davidson's saying, but it seems that that's appropriate for closing argument, and it certainly is not outlining what he intends the evidence to show.
I'm almost through, Your Honor. I will. That you would look at them in the eye, and you will be the judges of the credibility of the witnesses, and you will be the ones to say whether or not they're telling the truth or not. Now, that's what we're here for. As Mr. Ford already said, it's a search for the truth. And you're the ones that are here to determine what that truth is. And we believe that you will give our client a fair and honest evaluation. I believe that as the testimony comes on, that you will be able to look at it and decide what is credible and what is not, what things the police department has said. You can say whether that is credible or not. Look at its, consider its source, consider the motive, consider the logical and factual inconsistencies, and at the end of the case, we're going to ask you to come back and weigh these inconsistencies and the source and the motive against that heavy burden of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And we think that when you do, and that when you go back and deliberate, that you'll come back with the only possible verdict, and that's a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
May it please the court, fellow counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm going to be serious and I'm going to be brief, but let me warn you first. I told Mr. Fogleman last night, I said when I stand up, they're going to think they get to have to hear the other three attorneys that hadn't talked yet, and that's not the case. I'm the last guy who's going to talk because it's the state's burden prove this beyond a reasonable doubt, and therefore we get the final rebuttal closing argument. There's been a lot of talk about what this case is about, and I'm not here to tug, and this is not my intention, to tug at your heartstrings. But I want you to look at those three boys that were murdered, because there's been a lot of attention and the defense attorney's focus on sympathizing or empathizing with their client. What I think is a key in this case is not just who killed these boys, although that's the real issue y'all have to decide, who's involved in the murder of these defendants involved. But I think also important is what type of person was involved in these murders that could turn these three innocent-looking little 8-year-olds into the mutilated bodies that we've seen in those photographs. Because what type of person could do that is at the very center of this case. Because the defense has thrown out ideas such as could have been sexually motivated, could have been a transient, it could have been a serial killer. But like Mr. Fogleman told you, and I think when you look at the evidence and familiarize yourself, and I really do beg of you to go back there and take your time and look through this and sift through it and rationalize it. Because when you look at this evidence, you're going to see that it would be an absolute impossibility. I take that back. It would be within the realm of possibility, but that's not within reasonable doubt, for these kids to have been removed from those woods and killed somewhere else and brought back. It would make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And it would have been an ordeal and a task for a group of people to perform and to get, because the routes you have out are across that pipe through Blue Beacon or out across that open field where you would have to have carried the bodies for a quarter of a mile. And you're talking about the defense wants you to believe that it could have happened somewhere else because there's no blood found. And this may be a bad analogy, but remember that it was 30 days between the time these murders occurred and the time that these defendants were arrested. And that brings, you remember Mr. Ford mentioning, and I may skip around here some, but Mr. Ford mentioned, remember the letter of Gitchell on May 26 where he said we're blindfolded? Well, you remember the testimony of Officer Ridge that they talked with Jessie Misskelley on June 3rd of 1993, and on that night the arrests were made. And you remember the words of this defendant, Jason Baldwin, and this is through Michael Carson, but I put to you he's a credible witness. And they can say he's committed crimes, but Jason Baldwin wasn't going to be with anybody out there that wasn't in some trouble. I mean, that's a fact of life when you're in jail. But his credibility, he had no reason to lie, he had no motive to lie, and he got up here and he told you what Jason said. And it wasn't just the horrendous things that Jason had described that he did, which just happened to be consistent with the physical evidence in this case. It's what Jason said about Jessie Misskelley. Remember that? If Jessie Misskelley hadn't screwed up, I wouldn't be out here right now. And when I get out of here, because I'm gonna get off on this, when I get out of here, we're gonna have a big party. Now, Mr. Ford can attribute a great deal of skill and cunning and ability to Michael Carson. That Michael Carson is capable of fabricating this story, putting all these parts in that fit, and then getting up here and telling it strictly for the purpose of becoming a big shot, and can withstand Mr. Ford. And I'd say that he probably got cross-examined as hard as anybody that Mr. Ford tried. Mr. Ford's voice got higher with him than he did with anybody, because he was excited, and he tried to hammer him, and he tried to shake him. He got up there and he went after him, and he didn't shake him an ounce. And even the person in the jail, and I think Michael Carson told you he was reluctant to talk about what somebody else had said, and he wouldn't normally do it. But when he saw the parents of the victims on TV, and I believe it was the night before the trial in Corning started, when he saw that on TV, he picked up the telephone and they called me. And he told me what he knew, and he testified to it from the witness stand. And I put to you, if he was lying, if he was telling you something that wasn't true, they would have nailed him on some facts about what was going on out at the jail, who he was with, things of that nature, who was in the jail at the same time, where they were when it was said. You know, if he's going to fabricate something, he could have fabricated something a whole lot more grandiose than that. I mean, he could have come up with something that would have nailed. I mean, heck, why not go ahead and get the other defendant while you're at it if you're going to be a big shot? But he told what was accurate with the facts, and when you look at judging of credibility, you look at reasons and motives for fabrication. And he didn't have it. He didn't have any reason to benefit up here. If he was going to do it, he could have done it back a long time ago and maybe could have benefited himself, tried to gain something out of it. But his day in court's over with. His situation's done. There's nothing else to be gained. They want you to believe it happened somewhere else because that makes it less likely that it was someone who knew the area and was familiar with the area. This area out there, keep in mind, it's the perfect area to commit this crime. Number one, it has children that play all in this vicinity. Number two, this area of the ditch, if you'll recall from the testimony, that's a big cut bank there, what I call a cut bank, where the ditch has washed it out. And you can stand in the ditch, and the bank, the top of the bank's like right here. So if you're down in the bottom of that ditch on those plateaus and flat places, when the murders occurred, you not only have the benefit of the traffic and sound of the interstate highway and the seclusion of the woods around you, you're basically down in kind of a little crater or cavern when you're committing the offense. Now, they make a big deal about no blood found there. Well, like I said, there was 30 days elapsed. And all that had to have been done, and of course this was Mr. Ford, when he cross-examined Dr. Peretti, gave him X, Y, and Z examples, but all that had to be done is for something to be laid on the ground when the children are placed there. Whether it's a piece of plastic, a piece of bisqueen, and it's folded up and carried with them when they leave the woods that night. And we don't get them for 30 more days. So, I mean, they can leave and stuff it in a drainage ditch on the way home. A big coat spread on the ground could have served the same purpose. It could have been anything that covered the ground, or they could have been on the very edge of the water where their legs were in the water and where they bled into the water. No, we don't believe it occurred after dark because primarily, think of it, now they had, if you think of it logically, if they go, the kids are in the woods playing. The last they're seen is going into the woods. When they're found dead, less than 24 hours later they're in the woods. Logic would tell you that it occurred there. Also, they had massive head injuries. The logical scenario was that if to catch and corral 3 8-year-olds, and I think it would have been nearly like catching a covey of quail. There had to be more than one person doing it. To inflict injuries from multiple weapons, there had to be more than one person doing it. I mean, one person could use 3 different weapons, but logic tells you if you've got different type knots tied on the children and extremely different from one side to the next, if you've got 3 different weapons causing the injury, if you've got situations where the injuries are dissimilar, 3 weapons, 3 types of knots, those type differences, you realize that it had to be more than one person. If there's one person, how do they corral the kids? How do they tie the kids up? The head injuries had to be first. The head injuries, Mr. Ford says they can't be because there's no blood. Well, the type head injuries that you see here, a lot of the blunt trauma, and I think each of the kids sustained some blunt trauma to their head. Now, there are some injuries that are in the nature of cuts and open wounds, but the blunt trauma type injuries would debilitate the children, yet not cause this massive bleeding. But if they're alive, if they aren't debilitated first, then how in the world could you get them out of the woods? I mean, even if they're gagged, it's daylight, because they're in the woods around 6:30, it's still daylight, and you're having to take them out with one side an interstate highway and the other side a 300 to 500 unit apartment complex or a truck wash. I mean, how do you get the kids out? And if you do, why in the world do you come back and dump them there? I mean, if you want them to be found, you could put them in a lot better places. And if you didn't want them to be found, why in the world would you bring them back to where they were abducted in the first place? I mean, it literally doesn't make sense. This location is an absolute prime spot to abduct children, to ambush children, to commit a murder within what is really a fairly residential and busy area. It's absolutely a prime location. And the fact that that's important is really the main thing, is whoever did this wasn't some stranger that popped in off the interstate. Whoever did this and left those children there and pushed the clothes down in the mud was someone that was familiar with this area and familiar with what went on, familiar with the goings-on of these kids, to know to commit this crime here, to know that even though it doesn't appear that secluded, it's a heck of a place to pull this off. And I put to you, that's consistent with our defendants. Mr. Ford talks about, he said, there's nothing to connect, they don't have anything to connect my client. And he told you, and this is another one of his word games that he likes to play, he said all our witnesses said this couldn't be the murder weapon. This wasn't, wait, incorrect. This wasn't the murder weapon. Okay, is that what our witnesses said? Now think about it. Did our witnesses say this wasn't the murder weapon? What Dr. Preddy said was that the injuries are consistent with a serrated edge of this type. And I ask you, like Mr. Fogleman did, please go back and compare and look at these. The other thing to keep in mind, and John did mention this, but remember this knife has two cutting surfaces. It's got one here, and it's got this serrated portion back here. Now, the ripping type injuries you see on the children are on the inside of the thighs and the back of the thighs and the inside of the buttocks. Okay? When this surface is being used to remove the genitals, and the knife is worked in and they're trying to remove the genitals, this back surface is what's going to be coming in contact with the inside of the thigh and the back of the buttocks. The knife that you were shown over here, the Byers knife, it has but one cutting surface. If they're using that knife to remove the genitals, then the back of that knife has no cutting surface at all and wouldn't leave any marks on the inside of the leg or the back of the leg. And I ask you to go back there and look at this and think, when you're looking at those photographs and where those injuries are, think of how this knife was used. And I know it's not pleasant, but think of it and then look at where those marks are and how they match up with this particular side of the blade. Of course, Mr. Ford says that's not evidence because he doesn't want to believe it because it incriminates his client. He would rather talk about the mud in the bottom of the sacks. He would rather claim, and I don't even every case they claim police ineptitude. I mean, that's, as a prosecutor, I can nearly write that down as something that a defense attorney is going to say. They always get up here, and if they don't have anything else to talk about, they say, well, the police bungled it up because if they'd have done a better job like they do on TV, we'd have all the answers. And so they claim that the police messed up. Well, this is nothing unusual except I've never heard them allege that police staged photographs. And accusations like that, why they've reached the point that they're even accusing the police of actually manufacturing things, I don't know if it's reached that point of desperation or what, but I consider that not only inaccurate, but totally inappropriate based on the evidence. You look at the photographs. I mean, Mike Allen's face when he said that about the watch, you believe that Mike Allen really had more than one watch and he came out there at a later date? One thing that he also mentioned, and he said the fiber. Not a single witness said that fiber came from that road. Well, that's true. And you understand, I think, now that you've heard 3 experts in fiber testify, it's not like a fingerprint. You can't say that fiber came from that particular garment. However, what they can say is that fiber is microscopically similar in all characteristics to the known fibers we removed from a particular garment. Mr. Ford tries to minimize that and mislead you by saying they can't say it came from there. No, we can't. But we can say it's similar in all respects, and the only garment that was found in the searches of any of these places that had a fiber that matched, and you've seen those graphs, how well it matches. You know, they run perfectly parallel, contrary to what Mr. Lynch, the guy who can't flatten one, says. But those fibers match that garment, and it's one fiber. But it's microscopically similar in all respects to what came off that robe. And that robe came from Jason Baldwin's house. They make a big deal about there's no evidence at the scene. But think about it a minute. It's not there's no evidence connecting their client. Because what evidence was found out there connects to one of these two, for the most part. What they want you to do is say there's no evidence, but there's no evidence out there that points to anybody else. There's no evidence that points the finger if someone else did it. And that's their argument. You know, there's just not a whole lot of evidence out there that connects our client. But if someone else had committed the crime, then you'd see fibers out there that didn't match, didn't come back to one of these people. You'd see evidence out there that didn't match to either one of these. You'd see evidence that didn't connect. And you don't have that. There's just a sparsity of evidence. Somebody did a good job of cleaning it up. The same person who made sure they punched the clothes down in the mud so they wouldn't float up is the same person who cleaned that area. And they did a dang good job of it. And they removed most of the evidence. But there's a few things they didn't get. Both attorneys talk about Bojangles. And that's another sign of police ineptitude, but think about it. I mean, we've got a guy who is literally bleeding like a stuck hog when he comes in Bojangles. I mean, there's blood everywhere. It's in the entrance, it's in the floor, it completely soaked the toilet paper roll. Okay? The guy's unsteady, he seems to be kind of out of it. And this is the same guy they're trying to point the finger at and say, yeah, that's reasonable doubt. That could be the killer. Mr. Price he couldn't go that far. He said, well, it's possible. It's possible. Well, read that instruction on reasonable doubt. It's possible, but can you believe a crime scene that was so meticulously, and I say to you that's the crime scene, that was so meticulously devoid of any signs of the struggle or altercation, even though the bodies and remember, those bodies that were dumped there when they were recovered bled again when they were put up on the bank. And we know they were taken there and dumped, but whoever did it was so careful that there's not any blood in the area. You think that's any connection with the guy who's unsteady on his feet and comes walking in Bojangles about 8:30 that night and he's got blood all over the walls and got blood all over the toilet paper in the women's bathroom? I mean, come on. You use your head and logic. That is a red herring they're throwing out to try to get you off the track. Mr. Ford talked about, and I'm not sure what other than the fact that, I don't know if you find that the children were sexually abused or not, but he's wrong in one thing because there was testimony that there was a DNA source consistent with semen found on the pants of one of the children. And Mr. Ford indicated that there was no evidence of that. He talks about no mosquito bites. And I think it is important because I think the kids were hit in the head, and I think the evidence reflects they were hit in the head, they were tied up, and they were submerged in water before it got dark. In that time frame between the time they disappeared and the searchers started getting out there, and would have probably scared people off at that point because they're getting close enough to the area where the bodies were ditched, that between that time period, the reason you don't have mosquito bites on the body is because soon after those children went in the woods around 6:30, not too long after that time period, they're playing in there and they're abducted, they're tied, they're beaten in the head, the terrible cutting injuries are done to them, and they're dumped in the water. And that's why you don't find the mosquito bites. And that's why I'm not concerned about whether you can do this after dark, because I don't think the evidence is consistent with it having been done after dark. I don't think it's consistent with them having been removed out of there. And I think that's a reasonable conclusion you can draw from the evidence. Mr. Ford is real concerned about the question as to time of death. And I don't know what got into Dr. Peretti. I swear I do not have any idea what caused him to come up with that time range. But you've heard in the textbooks, you've heard Dr. Jennings, even Dr. Peretti leading up to it, it's like Dr. Jennings said, you can't give an opinion, you can't give an opinion, you can't give an opinion. Okay, Mr. Ford, I guess I'll throw this time range out. And it is absolutely as inaccurate and doesn't have anything to do, based on lividity alone, that time range has that is no more basis for an estimate as to time of death. It's like you said, it's putting the roof on without the foundation. The time of death, the only accurate range is from the last time they were seen until the bodies were discovered. And this isn't a TV show. That's as close with these factors as we can get. And they said, well, they didn't get all the information we need. But had they gotten a rectal temperature, they would have destroyed evidence possibly of sexual assault. Had they removed the bindings to determine the degree of rigor, they would have possibly destroyed evidence that had to do with those bindings. I remember there was a piece of tissue that was found in one. So, I mean, their decision to do what they did was based on a rational, logical alternative of we're going to give up some things to obtain others, and that's what they did. Mr. Ford talks about guilt by association in regard to Jason. And remember Dr. Griffiths, and I'm kind of, this satanic or occult motive thing is kind of a foreign concept to me. But when you've got people that are doing what was done to these three little boys, I mean, you've got the normal motives for human conduct don't apply. There's something strange going on that causes people to do this. I mean, you've got some weird people. And when you've got a set of beliefs, when you've got people out there that are following a particular set of beliefs that include human sacrifice, and it's evidenced in the books. I mean, he can say, I don't do it as a custom. But I mean, this guy's more, his mother said it was a phase he went through. I think he said he dabbled in it. I mean, you can judge him from the witness stand. The guy's as cool as a cucumber. He is nearly emotionless. And what he has done in terms of the satanic stuff is a whole lot more than just dabbling or looking into it for purposes of an intellectual exercise. I mean, the guy's handwritten incantations regarding sacrifice, letting the blood flow, all that sort of thing. I mean, that is indication of someone that's got some rather unusual belief system. Dr. Griffiths mentioned, he said, you oftentimes see that you've got one kind of charismatic guy that's heading the group. And he said this is oftentimes with these offshoots that aren't formalized occult or satanic groups, but they're just kind of offshoot groups that are kind of self-styled occultists. And you usually have one guy that's kind of the charismatic leader, and then you have some followers. Well, contrary to what Mr. Eckles told you from the stand, I don't think he's the introvert that he says. You see at the ballpark, and as Mr. Fogleman pointed out, he has the crowd of people around him. They're younger people, 16-year-olds like Jason Baldwin, who's his best friend, and the testimony was they spent 3 to 4 hours together nearly every day, that he would walk across town nearly every day to go out to the trailer park to be with his best friend Jason. And you see that, usually when you see people that associate that frequently, there's some sort of tie. Play basketball together, they're in athletics together, they go to school together. They have some common interest that binds them so that they spend that much time together. And I put to you that the leader in this case is Damien Echols. And the follower, one of the followers in this case, is Jason Baldwin. And it is so, like Mr. Fogleman said, serial killers don't work in packs. Psychotics don't run in packs. When you have multiple people involved in a murder like this, there's got to be some thread that connects them, that holds those people together so they act together in a focused effort. And I put to you, as bizarre as it may seem to you, and as unfamiliar as it may seem, this occult set of beliefs and the beliefs that Damien had and that his best friend Jason was exposed to all the time, that those are the set of beliefs that were the motive or the basis for causing this bizarre murder. And Mr. Ford might not like to accept that, and he may make fun of Dr. Griffiths. But in this case, I think the shoe fits. And the other more normal motives for human actions and the actions we find here just don't seem to cut it in this case, because you've got something this bizarre and this unusual. And like John said, we didn't make this stuff up. We didn't put the writings in the book, all that. That's stuff that was produced by Damien Echols. And if that indicates, and Mr. Price will say each little object doesn't indicate he's involved, but it indicates more than just a passing interest. It's somebody, when their dress changes, their ideas change, their religious beliefs change to that extent, and it's that type of religious beliefs then it's not a foreign idea to think that that has something to do with their motivations or motivating their actions and affecting their actions. When Damien was telling us, remember about the interview, and he's talking about what Officer Ridge asked him, and he said, I asked him, I said, well, Damien, I said, you told the officer that whoever did it's probably laughing at the police. Yeah, I said that. Well, why do you think that? Well, common sense would tell you that. And I thought at that time, well, that's a tad strange. To me, common sense, but maybe I hadn't thought about it. And then he started reeling off these things, like the person, it would have happened out in the woods because they couldn't hear him scream, but the person who did it would have really liked to have heard him scream, really enjoy hearing him scream. Why do you think that? Well, common sense would tell you that. I thought, well, okay. And so he went through and he reeled off a number of things, and he kept saying, just looking real flat, unemotional, common sense would tell you that. And I know when I got home that night, it started, when we're dealing with somebody, whoever committed this crime has to be one warped individual. And the person who talks in terms of the person who did this would have liked to have heard him scream. The person who did this wouldn't mind if they got caught. Then that is a mind, that is a frame of mind that fits the person who committed this crime. And it fits the guy who was out there at 9:30 at night. And it's kind of funny, at one point they want to believe Narlene, but they don't want to believe Narlene. I mean, you can take them a lot of ways, but I don't think Narlene lied to you when she said she saw Damien out there. And once you accept that, then why in the world is Damien and the rest of his group lying to cover him where he was on the 5th? What difference does it make? Why didn't he get up here and level with us? Well, heck, I was going down to Love's truck stop on the 5th. Put Dominique up here, let her tell you what they were doing. But if Anthony and Narlene are telling you the truth, and you heard her say that about getting them in the car, she wasn't going to have him in the car because she wouldn't let her kids sit on his lap. She knew who was out there. I mean, Damien himself admits what a distinctive-looking character he is. I mean, you wouldn't drive by and miss him with your bright lights on at night if you knew who he was. And she knew who was out there. And if he's out there, then he's lying to you. And if he's lying to you, his whole family's lying to you. And the question I've got for you, if they're lying to you about all that, why? Why? Have they got something to hide? I put it to you, they do. Also, remember Damien saying, and I think this is a real coincidence, and y'all can play a little detective on your own when you go back here. Remember this book that just comes from the library? See all this stain on the back of it? Y'all go back here and look at that, kind of tilt it in the light, and look at it and see if that isn't blue wax to you. See if that doesn't look like some blue wax to you. You can run your finger on it, but it reflects. It's got kind of shiny surface to it. You remember old Damien telling us that one of those, that whoever was doing this would have probably, if it was satanic involved, probably been some candles out there. Well, we've got one of the boys' shirts that had that blue wax on his shirt. And Damien will tell you, well, those red marks in this book, those must have been in the library before I got it. But is this just going to be another one of those coincidences? Damien's out there at 9:30. Damien tells two people who don't know him from Adam. They overhear him say he committed the murder. Their mother comes into court and testifies under oath that that's what their daughter said. Narlene and Anthony tell you that. And is this just another coincidence that we've got blue candle wax on the shirt of one of the victims, and we've got blue candle wax on this book involving and dealing with the occult? You go back there and play your own little examination with that. I know y'all are real tired, and I haven't gone over everything I marked in pink. We'd be here I frantically wrote down every time I'd hear something. I'd think, gee, I'm going to say something about that. I wrote it down on my notepad, and I don't think if I talked about it, it'd make much difference at this point. I know y'all are tired. But when you go back there and think of what was brought up by the defense attorneys, look at what we have to prove. and what our burden of proof is. And look and see if what they're saying really has anything to do with what we have to prove. And our proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Look and see if it really is something that goes to raise a reasonable doubt, or is it something that they threw in as a possibility? Because I've heard that word so many times during this trial, I'm getting sick of it. Because possibilities don't have any place in this courtroom. If you find reasonable doubt, you can act on that, but possibilities and possible doubts don't count, and that ain't good enough. Mr. Ford asked you during voir dire, he begged with you and said, I want you to, when you get on this case, I don't want you to make, it's so serious, I don't want you to make a mistake. Well, I don't want y'all to go back there and make a mistake either. Because while they've told you what the price tag and the liberty and freedom of their clients is on one side of the line, well, he said the lives of children are on the other side. And we have presented, and it's a circumstantial case, but circumstantial evidence is good enough for a conviction. That's what that rule and instruction tells you. And reasonable doubt, all that means is every day you make decisions in your life. And you make tough decisions, important decisions. And you take all the factors you've got, and when you have that gut feeling that you're doing right, then you act. And all of us do that. And reasonable doubt is the standard that's applied in every criminal case in this country from the time it began. And every defendant that's been convicted has been convicted based on that burden of proof. So it's nothing new. It's no miracle hill to climb. It's a certain level, and it doesn't get higher because of the nature of the case. It's the same in this case as it is in any other criminal case. So when you go back there, look at that in regard to Damien. And I think and there is a connection between, I think Damien's the link with Jason. I think there is a connection between the two that you can consider in determining the guilt of this other defendant. I think there's that connection. I think you find it in the evidence. But when you go back there, ask yourself, look at all the evidence, his belief system, what Narlene and Anthony said, what the girls at the softball park said, the fact that the fibers match up, the wax we've got on his book, in regard to Jason, the red fiber, and what Michael Carson said. Because this is a time when you've got to make hard decisions. Michael Carson's either he's lying to you or he's telling you the truth. And it's not somewhere in between. And I put it to you, he's telling you the truth. Kids like him don't come in here and do that for nothing. When they tell something like that and they put themselves in that position, they're shooting you straight. Because he don't like that witness stand. And he's telling you what happened. And when you put all the evidence together and you wrap it up, we don't have to put evidence out the sky. We've got to convince you so that you have that conviction in your stomach when you go back there and you look at that evidence. And I put to you, we've done that in this case, that the defendants are guilty of capital murder. Couldn't be a worse capital murder ever committed in this state that I can be aware of. I mean, it's premeditated, deliberate. It's the worst possible kind of killing you can have. And when you go back there, sort through that evidence, go through it carefully, look at this knife, look at those photos, look at all the evidence and piece it together. And when you do, you're going to find that these defendants are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And you can feel good. You don't have to feel guilty, which is what defense attorneys want you to do. You can feel good in returning a verdict of guilty once you've gone through that evidence and made that determination that there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you.